Now, the government has been told its flagship benefit scheme, Universal Credit, is not delivering value for money, has been too slow to roll out and is causing financial hardship. A damning report from the National Audit Office says there's strong evidence that some claimants are turning to food banks or getting into debt whilst they wait for payment. Well, Universal Credit was first introduced in 2013. It was designed to make claiming benefits simpler by merging 6 benefits, including child tax credit and income support, into one single payment. But the move to the new system has long been criticised for its delays and flawed implementation. Last year, 40% of claimants waited 11 weeks for their first payments. Almost 1 million people currently receive the benefit, around 10% of the final number expected to be claiming it by 2023. Well, ministers say Universal Credit is good value for money and significant improvements have been made to its delivery. Last year, 3 people using the new system told us about some of the issues they had faced.
So you applied 2 weeks ago,
yeah,
and they've been told your first payment will be on the 28th of October.
Yeah, it's a lot of weeks to wait and relying on food banks. My friends have had to wait 12 weeks, so...
I've rung up landlords before and said to them that I'm not on Universal Credit, but as soon as I've gone to meet them and I say I'm on Universal Credit, it's a no, we ain't got no rooms. I say to them that I'll give you a month's rent, yeah, and just give me a month's tenancy, and if I don't pay it, which I will pay it, but then that's it. Kick us out, but they won't even do that.
Been in debt with the rent for forever. I knew that it would be at least 6 weeks before I got any money. I knew I'd be without money, and when I brought this up at my job centre 6 weeks or so before, I was reassured that I'd be fine. You know, I did dread the phone ring and I did dread the post coming, you know, and I just threw them on the side and I'd open them, you know, next week or whatever, because I knew that they were debt letters, you know. It ruins your life, you know, because you don't know, it spirals out of control so fast when you're in debt. And I just, yeah.
Well, we can speak now to Don Locke. He has been on Universal Credit for 4 months and has already got into £3,000 worth of debt. Also with us is Sherry Fuller. She only started on Universal Credit a month ago, but says without the help of friends and family, she would be homeless. Both Don and Sherry are first-time users of the welfare system. We can also speak to Devon Golani, who is Director of the Policy in Practice think tank and one of the architects of the government's Universal Credit policy. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Don, tell me first of all about how going onto Universal Credit was for you. What was your experience?
Yeah, so thank you for having me on today. First of all, the experience is relatively faceless. It's an entirely online system. The main thing that categorises my experience is the wait, that initial wait between when you first make your claim and when you actually receive your first payment is enormous. You don't know anything about, you know, what you're going to expect.
When you say enormous, how long did you wait?
About 6 weeks, as the government has advertised previously. But I understand that the effect that can have on people and the effect that it's had on me myself, especially when you haven't got an income coming in and you've got extremely high rents to pay, you've got bills to pay, the effect that it can have on your mental health, for example, can be catastrophic.
So what did you do in those 6 weeks where you had no money coming in and Universal Credit hadn't reached you yet? Then what?
I had to use my overdraft and I had to rely on credit cards. It's unfortunate. It's not something I wanted to do, but I didn't have an option. You know, when you've got a bill that comes in and you have to pay it, you don't have a choice. You can obviously borrow against the amount that you're entitled to later on, but the payments that were calculated for me were only £60 more than my monthly share of the rent anyway. So if I were to borrow into that amount, it would then mean that I would have less money to actually pay my rent.
Because if you borrow into that, you still have to pay it back. That's not just given to you for free. Sherry, tell us your experience.
Well, as you say, I'm very recent to it. I was made redundant last year after working in the local government for 17 years, mostly in public health. And I've done a few jobs since then, but various contracts came to an end and I realised I have no income. I've been struggling for a couple of months trying to get by with help from friends and family. But I thought I'm going to have to go to the job centre and see how this works. And I agree with what Don said. It's quite, although I sat with a person, it's a very impersonal experience. And from the outset, it's almost this punishment model that you have to commit to looking for work for 35 hours. If you can't evidence that you're doing that, will take away the small amount of money that you get. And for me with a mortgage, the payment doesn't actually cover the mortgage at all. So I was allocated £317 per month, but because I did need the money straight away, because I don't have an overdraft or any credit cards, so I didn't have any money at all, I took the advance that I then have to pay back that Don spoke about. So I'll be getting about £290 and my mortgage is £680. So I asked them, what do I do? What do I do about my mortgage? There are things I've since found out through my friends that you can try to make arrangements with, but there was no advice, there was no signposting, there was no support as to what I might be entitled to or how I got help. So I was just told, well, perhaps you can ask friends and family for help, or you can just speak to your mortgage provider and see what they can do for you. So, I mean, £290, having totted up my car insurance, and you need a car for a lot of jobs that you're applying for, so it's not a case that you can just get rid of your car. You need internet because everything you need to do is online. So car, internet, your water rates, your gas, your electric, everything else. My expenses for those essentials come to about £360 a month. So I'm getting £290, which doesn't even cover the essentials.
Devon, listening to this, you came up with the idea of universal credit. Do you accept it's failing?
I think clearly a significant proportion of claimants are struggling with universal credit. One of the reasons I moved out of policy and set up policy in practice was to see how what I still believe is fundamentally a very good policy idea manifests in practice. And I think what we're seeing here is that it's very messy and it has particularly difficult impacts on some people's lives. We now build systems that help people to navigate, people like Don and Sherry, to navigate the benefit system to see where else they can turn to for support, whether or not their calculations are accurate. And I think those are systems, and as you say, if it's faceless, as I think you've both sort of described it, there should be a little bit more, certainly, well, frankly, a lot more engagement from the Department for Work and Pensions with the support that is available on the front line, whether that's through their own work coaches or other organisations.
That every time we cover this issue on this programme, and we've done it a lot, every single time, it's about people saying, it's the delay.
Yeah.
It's the delay, and I have no money. Why on earth has this not been sorted?
So I think it's definitely a lot better than it was. So there are a bunch of changes announced in the budget last autumn, and what we've seen since then that ensure people are able to access advances. And what we've seen is many more people accessing that initial payment.
But the advance doesn't help because you've then got to pay it back.
Yes, but it does help with that initial wait. I think a couple of other things.
But then if it doesn't cover the rest of your money, it doesn't.
But so the amount of money you get is, I think, outside of the system. Universal credit is how the money is paid. If you're not getting enough money, well, that's a problem with the benefit system in general, and you can definitely make a case to say people need more to get by, and I think that's exactly the case Sherry was making just now.
I want to bring in Heidi Allen at this point, Conservative member of the Work and Pensions Select Committee. Heidi, I'm not sure how much you've heard of what Sherry and Don were explaining about their experiences, but just to summarise it for you, both really struggled with the delay that they faced in getting that initial payment. It meant that Sherry says she would effectively be homeless because she'd had to use family and friends to support her. Don has already gone £3,000 in debt. Do you accept that universal credit, which was brought in by your government, is failing?
Not failing, but I just caught the tail end of what you were saying, Victoria, there about that you've obviously covered this an awful lot and time again. It's the delay that people talk about, and Devon's right. The system itself, when it's working as it should be, will be fantastic. But the difficulty we're seeing is that there are too many people waiting too long. And one of the reasons why we urged the government repeatedly, but last year also, to slow down the rollout is because while the rollout was very slow, you could kind of almost get away with it. But now it's starting to affect an awful lot of people, and it's around about 1 in 5 people are not being paid on time. And that's just not good enough, because when you've got a lot of people coming onto the system, that's an awful lot of people. And it's once people get on the system, they like it and they see that it's transformatively better than the old benefit system. But we've got real issues getting people on time. And my biggest worry is that the people who are struggling the most are people with disabilities, people with caring responsibilities, and people who are trying to work but have got childcare costs, who are the very people we want to get into work. And they are, when you look at the statistics of the NAO report, affected more than anybody else.
Heidi, I want to let Sherry come in because I can see she's pulling faces, and I think it's important.
I can't see them.
No, I appreciate that, but I think it's also worth pointing out, and figures are difficult, but this is important. In 2017, a quarter, so 113,000 new claimants weren't paid in full on time. And January to October 2017, 40% of those affected by late payments waited 11 weeks or more. 20% waited 5 months or more. I mean, this is real desperate times. Sherry, do you speak to Heidi?
Yeah, I was pulling a face about the idea that it's fantastic. I'm not sure I would agree with that. And from the amount of people that I know who've had to use benefits for one reason or another, it's not a fantastic place to be. It's a horrible place to be. And very often you're getting so little money that you are having to rely on food banks, you're having to rely on the goodwill of those around you. And I'm so lucky I have a good support system, because it's not enough. I've worked nigh on 30 years, giving away my age, and I've paid my national insurance, my taxes. This is a service that I've paid for, effectively, and it would be nice to not just be able to pay my bills, but to be able to live. I can't take part in community activities, I can't go to even quiz nights with my friends, there's no extra money for you to socialise. People become more and more socially isolated when they're having to live on this incredibly frugal lifestyle that really doesn't give you enough money to even cover the basics of living.
Sure,
and then you see mental health problems. I mean, I come from a public health background, so I'm aware of the health effects that people can have. Sorry.
I think, no, I was just sorry to come in. I was just going to say, I think those criticisms I've heard, but you could make exactly that same set of criticisms if you were finding yourself on the current benefit system today, of it being faceless, and it's compounded by having to go to a number of different agencies and organisations. So I think the measure of success for universal credit has to be how it's doing against the current benefit system, and actually that's probably another area where
it was meant to come in to save money. This was the big thing. We were told this is going to save lots of money, it's going to drive people to more work, it's going to incentivise them to get into work, and importantly, critically, in austerity times when this was first discussed, it's going to bring that bill down. This report today has said nonsense. That's absolutely not going to happen. It's going to make no difference at all, and people are suffering the pain, and it's not saving the public any money.
So that's an area where I don't fully agree with the National Audit Office. If you look at the evidence that is available, I think what they're saying is that the quality of evidence available is not good enough, and that's a separate point. What evidence is available does suggest that universal credit is having a positive impact on employment, albeit small. And we've done some research ourselves that looks at people on universal credit versus a control group, and we've corroborated that. So there is the evidence that is available suggests there is a small positive employment effect, and I would say that's something to be applauded and recognised rather than something challenged, certainly. But let's build on that as opposed to...
Have you been incentivised into work?
So I took a job recently, as it goes, as a low-paid retail worker. I took it because I needed something. I had bills to pay. I couldn't carry on going in debt. When I started working, I just took a 20-hour-a-week job just to get some income coming in. My benefits dropped from about £730 a month, which already wasn't enough, given that my monthly share of the rent was about £675, leaving me with about 60 quid to pay everything off. And it went down to about 230. So overall, I get about less than a grand a month. Now, I'm grateful for whatever help that I can get. But I know that the effect that this can have on people that aren't perhaps as savvy as I am, that can't navigate sort of difficult situations as easily as I can, who don't have parents that they can borrow from, it's going to be catastrophic.
And is it worth going to work for an extra, what, £200 a month?
It's worth it to me because...
But would it be to everybody?
Not necessarily.
I think you've got to compare it to the benefit system we've got today. If you look at work incentives within the current benefit system, you could find yourself in exactly the same position and take home an extra tenner a week, working just as many hours. And I think that's one of the benefits Universal Credit has tried to bring in. We would argue that you can still put more money into work incentives. Certainly when I worked on it at the Centre for Social Justice. It was more generous than how it's currently implemented.
Okay, I want to bring Heidi Allen back in because I want to pick up on the point that Sherry just made about having to go to food banks, and many people we've spoken to have said that they have to use food banks, particularly in that difficult time before they are given that first payment when moved on to universal credit. Do you recognise, Heidi, what the NAO report says? It's agreeing with the Trussell Trust report showing an upsurge of 30% in food bank use in the 6 months after universal credit rolls out in any given area. Do you accept that?
I do 100%, and it's something.
So that's a failure then, isn't it?
Well, it's because in the last conversation you just had with your three guests there, you've touched on lots of different aspects of universal credit. But the biggest reason why people end up at food banks is the original question that you put to me, is why people are having to wait so long to get onto it. And the government, I think, have wrongly I know it's difficult stuff to talk about, but we have to accept when we get things wrong. They haven't wanted to kind of see the connection between increased food bank usage and areas where UC is being rolled out. But I absolutely do agree and accept that. And I work with the Trussell Trust. In fact, I'm going to visit another one next week, not in my constituency, and I'm meeting the Chief Exec in a couple of weeks again. We have to accept this because it is a manifestation, it's a symptom of what happens when people are waiting too long for money. But one of the other issues you just touched on was around work incentives. Universal credit is better because it has this tapered feature to it, so that if you take on a couple more hours, you don't drop off, whereas in the old benefit system, if you went over 18 hours, that was it, all your benefits were taken away. So the system is better, but we have to give people more support, and it's called universal support. That was the design of the system, to get people onto it as quickly as possible, and that's the bit where we're missing a trick. We need to invest in that. To help people get onto the system so that they can receive that support from work coaches and get their payments on time. It's the front end.
I want to bring Don and Sherry back in because you are the two people here with the experience. You've got the architects of the policy on your left, you've got Conservative MP on your right. What do you think, each of you, needs to change to make a difference to people like you who are just switching on to universal credit?
So I think that the key thing that people need most from any benefit system is stability. And I think in the context of people that are claiming social welfare, what people need and expect from their system is to be able to say, this is what I can rely on from my government. From a bigger perspective, from a housing perspective, which is where I come from, this is going to have a huge knock-on effect on both the private sector landlord sort of environment as well as...
And some landlords are even saying now they don't want to take people on who are on universal credit because of concerns about payments.
So the National Housing Federation pointed out that 73% of tenancies that are on universal credit are in arrears versus 29% that are on the old system. It's essential that we recognise the effect that this can have on your housing situation.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, as somebody that has a mortgage, apparently universal credit doesn't cover that, so one has to find other ways of getting support with mortgage. So again, you're in this precarious, very frightening position for any homeowner, for anybody really, that worries about having a roof over their head. So stability, completely agree. And having a more advisory, supportive approach for people that find themselves in the position of needing support, rather than this, you'll do this or we'll take away what little money you get. Because I think people do want to work. I don't think you need to hold a bit of a stick over them to say, do this or you won't get anything, which just makes them more scared, more apprehensive, more anxious. People do want to work, so be more supportive, give that stability, and see people as customers of a service that they've probably been paying in for a very long time.
Heidi Allen wants to come back in. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, that's kind. On the gentleman's first point about the housing benefits, he is right, we have had a problem with this, but that will be fixed. One of the big concessions we got in the budget last year was that anybody who has come onto the system with housing benefit that they're a recipient of, they will get an additional 2 weeks payment of housing benefit, extra 2 weeks of housing money. So as we start to see that filter through the system, a bit late, we could have done with it sooner, but now that's in place from April, I believe, this year. That should significantly address that problem. The second thing, yes, absolutely, Sherry, it's this universal support part I've been talking about. It's not just an IT system. People need the hand-holding, to get onto it and then to take the support from it to help them through what are very difficult times and into better work. And that's the bit where The system itself, I think, will be great, but it needs more investment in the hand-holding side of things, if you like. The work coaches in job centres are being asked to be miracle workers, experts on everything, which they can't be. And that universal support, whether it's housing associations, Citizens Advice Bureau, I think the government needs to seriously look at contracting that out almost.
Okay.
It's like a standalone service that goes with a universal credit claim.
Heidi Allen, thank you ever so much. Thank you all so much for coming in.